Hello, hello, beautiful soul, and welcome to this celebration of the goddess in her form as Brahmacharini. If you are viewing this during day or night 2 of Navratri, a blessed and beautiful Navratri to you. I am so glad that you're here. If you are viewing this another time, welcome, because I know that there is not a lot of video material out there at this time about goddess in her form as Brahmacharini. So I am so happy that you have clicked on this video today and are presented with this introduction. I'm going to be doing my best to present her to you briefly and in ways that help you understand her as she is coming to you or as you would like to celebrate her. So let's get started. There is a Navadurga playlist that you will find linked with some other goodies in the video description if you are called to explore the other aspects and forms of goddess. But Brahmacharini is interesting. She is one of the few forms or aspects or avatars of Mahadurga who presents with only 2 arms and hands. And so we're going to tell a little bit of her story today. She is actually also one of the few that presents without a vehicle for her avatar. So you will notice that very often the forms of Durga or the forms of Hindu deity present with vehicles or other forms of deity that they ride on. So previously we explored how yesterday's aspect of Durga rides on Nandi, Shiva's bull, and in most times and cases you will notice that Durga rides on a lion or a tiger depending on which form she is in and which area of the world she is working in. But you will see with Brahmacharini, she presents just as herself, and that is significant because of her journey that she took in life. So let's first start with her name. And I always found it interesting, although Brahmacharini is an aspect or an avatar of the goddess Durga or of the goddess Parvati, Lord Shiva's beloved, she presents with the first part of her name as a dedication to being a Brahmin or a devotee or wisdom bearer like Lord Brahma, which is one of the other main deity aspects in the Hindu Holy Trinity or the Hindu Trimurti. So we're going to talk about why that is and how Brahmacharini had a relationship with Lord Brahma as well. But it is an important note to make because that first part and aspect of her name, Brahma, is a representation of the one self-existent spirit, right? So Lord Brahma in the Trimurti is the aspect of God that is creation. Lord Shiva is the aspect that is the destroyer, but in most cases the destroyer of ignorance and not by, let's say, fearful means in my experience. And then Lord Vishnu is known as the preserver. So Brahmacharini, holding this part of Brahma's name, is a representation of how dedicated she was to being one with the self, being one with all, and a dedication to her journey in life, which we're going to talk about in terms of sacred knowledge and sacred self and even destiny to a certain extent. Now, Charini, at that end of her name there, means occupation with, engaging with. So put it together and Brahmacharini is about the engagement with the one self-existent spirit or the one God, because contrary to popular belief, Hinduism is actually a religion which does respect monotheism to a certain extent, because all of these polytheistic aspects and all of these different forms and avatars of deity, whether that is masculine or feminine, always are reminding us and pointing back to their original sources. So that's something I love to help people people understand, as someone who works with many different religious forms and aspects and pantheons throughout the world, I have always adored the fact that Spirit has showed me how they can all connect to the one, that we all, in my belief and tradition, stem from one source. And Hinduism, I believe, is one of the purest representations of that, because we have all these avatars of different forms of deity that lead you back to their original source, and then once you get to that original source, you go even further back to the one, which is separationless. So that is something I always love to share with people, and hope that if you are not someone who is very familiar with Hinduism, you will explore that more and help it to use it rather to help you understand your own multidimensionality and your own part and connection with source and with all of that is. So back to Brahmacharini, that little PSA being said there. Let's talk about her incarnation. So she is one of the avatars, as I said, of the goddess Durga, or the goddess Parvati. And yesterday we spoke a little bit about how her previous incarnations were also of the goddess Sati. And Sati was married and a beloved of Lord Shiva. However, she was a daughter of a king who did not approve of Lord Shiva, who did not respect or worship Lord Shiva, and when they were disinvited to a celebration of the king, Sati martyred herself and threw herself in the fire. And when this happened, Lord Shiva went into deep despair, went into deep seclusion, hermit mode, isolation, and really withdrew from the world into himself. Now, the other gods and the world and the universe did not want this to be, and so Goddess was called to incarnate again. But she made sure, as I believe that we also, before we are born, to a certain extent, plan out our life and our lifetime as a co-creation. She made sure to request that she would be born in this lifetime to people who respected Lord Shiva, and so that she would not have that problem again. However, when she was born again, as a form of Parvati, before she took on the name Brahmacharini through the journey that she had later in life, she was born through the veil. She was reincarnated through the veil, and she did not at first remember who she was. It was also important that she was reincarnated because of the fact that it was said that only a son of Lord Shiva could kill a certain asura demon who was out and wreaking havoc within the world. And so a wife, a beloved of Lord Shiva, needed to be born in order to bring this prophecy into place to protect the world. And Goddess heard that call and was in fact incarnated. She lived for a while as Parvati, as this sacred daughter of the mountain, and it was said that Shiva was meditating up on the mountain. Shiva was heard about but seldom seen. He also was very often found with ashes on him going into cemeteries. He was exploring with the ghosts and the demons of the world, and I believe exploring his power and himself, and going through what many of us would recognize as a dark night of the soul to his aspect and degree that he would do that as deity. And so during this time, Parvati was growing up, and while she was walking one day on the side of a mountain, a sage met her and recognized her essence as Parvati, as beloved and wife of Shiva, as reincarnation of Sati, and spoke to her about this and started to reawaken her memories, which by the way, is not something that I recommend. I don't recommend that we are here to tell other people their story if they're not consenting to it and seeking for it and exploring it. So that's just a consent note from me as someone who does Akashic records and past life readings. However, it is an important part of the story because Parvati was still quite young when this revelation happened. And so after she met this sage, she went into a practice of studying as much as she could, of exploring herself, and of learning through the sage or other means that's still a little bit unknown, the story of how she was meant to be reincarnated to reacquaint herself with and remarry Lord Shiva, and eventually bring sons into the world. Those are other means, perhaps for another time, if you know the story of their two most prominent sons. But so she did this, and she then went into a practice of tapasaya. And excuse me if I don't pronounce things correctly. By the way, I'm not a native Hindi speaker. But she went into this practice, which is a practice of deep penance. Now, this is also why she is presented in her form as just herself. She doesn't have a vehicle. She's not presented with those other forms of helper. She also, in this lifetime, went into extreme hermit mode for a period of around 5,000 years. Now, tapasaya is a form of deep penance. It's a form of abstinence. It's also why in other Indian and Hindu tradition, there is a practice known as brahmachari, not brahmacharini, which would be her female identification with it. But brahmachari can be performed and practiced by anyone. It is a practice of abstinence, and it could be a form of practice of abstinence from anything. It is very often a practice of abstinence from the world and hermit mode while you learn. It could be abstinence from things that are ignorant or distracting or unhealthy, but in most cases people practice it as a form of abstinence from carnal relations. They practice it as a form of celibacy. They form a practice of semen retention, which is said in certain traditions, not only Hindu traditions, also ancient Gnostic traditions and practices that Christ was said to practice as well, where if men especially practice semen retention, there is a phenomenon that can sometimes happen where more energy goes up to the pineal gland for a form of awakening. Although different forms of restraint and abstinence can be seen in some cases and cultures as healthy for feminine-bodied people and for goddesses as well. Because sometimes that is a distraction. And goddess practiced this abstinence because she knew from this early age that she was meant only for Lord Shiva. And that is a choice that she continued to make, which is something that's very important to note, because even if you are or believe that you are destined to be with a certain person, it is important to continue to make that choice and leave room for their free will to continue to choose you, in my opinion. But looking at it from the outside, we can see how both Lord Shiva and Goddess Parvati were choosing each other, but needed these periods of hermit mode, I like to say, rather than penance, where they were exploring themselves, where they were healing their hurts, where they were going through their dark nights of the soul. And Brahmacharini did this by way of going into the forest, being by herself, leaving her kingdom, and really devoting herself to the practice of herself and to the practice of what she believed was ascending to the form of herself that was ready to be accepted as Lord Shiva's wife again. And it was a practice where I believe and have been shown Lord Shiva was also doing things to free himself from the hurt and turmoil of losing her in the way that he did in her previous incarnation. So that's something that's important to note, because actually last year, from a much different paradigm and much different perspective of mine, I made a video about Brahmacharini and twin flames. And while I believe there will be definitely some people who will resonate with her role and example and inspiration as that, it's funny how much things can change in a year and how much perspective can change and deepen in a year. And I really have formed and come to such a higher understanding of twin flames. That's something to discuss at another time, or you could view my other works on my channel about that, and healing programs and template clearings that I have about that journey. But I no longer believe that we have to put ourselves through such a painful, templated process. And so this time of year, during her celebration, Brahmacharini has been coming to me in a very different way. And that's why I've been called to tell more of her story and present it to you in this way. So back to her story and back to her penance, which I actually don't really like to call it penance, because I don't believe that she sinned. So I like to really say practice and devotion and hermit mode more than penance. You know, forgive me if you are very attached to her role as being penitent or abstinent, but I don't believe that she was on a lower plane. And so while I very much honor her journey of herself, I don't feel like she was doing any of that to earn Lord Shiva. I believe that they were maybe doing work individually to come to a more balanced meeting point and meeting of the minds and meeting of the ways by doing whatever they needed to do for themselves in order to clear their dark nights of the soul or their own personal karma or wounding or whatever it was. But I very much disliked the orientation that the story took in a lot of tellings, where it appeared as though Brahmacharini was less than, or was needing to do this in order to earn Lord Shiva back. I believe that doing this and going into this hermit mode and going into this exploration of the self was maybe projecting her into a reality where he was ready to receive her again. And as we said, that took thousands of years. But I, again, don't like the assumption that she needed to earn him back, because I see them very much as equals. But nonetheless, let us tell the story of those thousands of years, because that plays an important part of her story. So she was alone in the forest for these thousands of years. There were said to be severe weather conditions, and she faced all of that alone. During the first 1,000 years, it's said that she survived on a diet of only flowers and fruits. During the next 1,000, or 100 to 1,000, depending on which telling you are resonating with, it's said that she survived on leafy vegetables alone. And then for 3,000 additional years, she survived on bila leaves, or the leaves that were dried and fell off the trees while she was sleeping on the floor. Later than that, before attracting enough attention, some people say, or completing her dark night of the soul or penance, she is said to have survived on only water, without food, and then eventually without water as well, which is also playing a role in how she presents herself. So that is why, if you look at her image here, she presents with the kamdal, or the water utensil, in her left hand. But by doing this, by even going without and attaining a state with which now is promoted as breatharianism, I believe it's pronounced as, which I don't personally recommend, but it is out there from some yogis. by attaining this state, she attracted the attention of Lord Brahma, and which is also why it is believed that she took on this part of Brahma's name, where by having such deep dedication, to her goal to marry Lord Shiva again and to, let's say, attain her goddess knowledge again by working her way through the levels of the veil, Lord Brahma pronounced her boon and said that she would get this blessing of becoming Lord Shiva's wife again. And so after that happened, Lord Shiva was sort of snapped out of it and snapped into his awakening, and he, listened to how he had been hearing about her, how he had been hearing about this woman who was so dedicated to the love of him. And so he hid himself and glamoured himself as an old man looking sage, and went to her in the forest and tried to talk himself down and say, why is someone as beautiful as you interested in Lord Shiva? He hangs out with ghosts and demons. Why are you interested in him? And perhaps seeing through his guise and perhaps not, the goddess said to him how much she believed him to be wrong, and how much she loved Lord Shiva and adored him, and how much she wanted him to come out of his painful period, and really truly believed that she was worthy of the goal that she had set for her soul of reuniting with him and marrying him again. And with that, Lord Shiva snapped out of the ashes, snapped out of the sage guise, and took her as his wife again. Not took her, with her consent, of course, but they became husband and wife again. And so that is why Brahmacharini presents to people and presents to devotees as someone who can help you attain any goal with enough devotion, with enough practice. And of course, I do want to say, whatever enough is actually up to you and whatever form of deity that you believe you are co-creating with. It doesn't have to be Hindu. It doesn't have to be Judeo-Christian. It can be whatever form of source or higher power that you believe in, that you believe you are co-creating with. And when that is a co-creative decision that you believe you have done enough, then you get to release it to the universe and allow it to be. And whatever enough is going to be different for each person. So while hermit mode and penance and abstinence and devotion and dedication are extremely admirable, and while they can garner great rewards, and while Brahmacharini's story does go to show us and teach us that you can attain anything you want, I do also want to put that disclaimer from myself that those goals can grow and heal and change and shift with us. So please leave room for that as well. And that you don't have to necessarily do all the things. And I'm getting a siren outside, so apologies if you hear that in the background. But it is a siren call to say that you don't necessarily have to do all the things, and you don't have to do things to prove that you are worthy of your goal. What you are doing, in my opinion and experience, is to help you believe that you are worthy, to prepare you, to prepare yourself and your soul to vibrate in resonance with that goal, and to be a vehicle and a receptacle ready to receive it in the ways that you have outlined, intended, prayed, or asked for, or in even better ways. So if you are a manifester, if you are a self-healer, whatever your goal is, I hope that speaks to you and inspires you. And I hope Goddess Brahmacharini and her dedication and her actual receive of her goal speaks as an inspiration to you during this time, or whatever time you feel called back to this material. I also want to speak a little bit more about the symbolism of Brahmacharini in terms of the lotuses that you see draped all over her here and in many of her depictions. They are said to symbolize her knowledge, and they can speak to that Brahmaness, that knowledge. Yesterday in our previous incarnation, we spoke about how the lotus can symbolize rebirth, and it can symbolize rebirth or reincarnation. But here it's so important how they point out that knowledge. So if you are a knowledge seeker, if you are a man or a woman of letters, self-taught or otherwise, I hope that Brahmacharini or another form of goddess in another pantheon, perhaps Athena, speak to you and speak to that dedication of the pursuit of knowledge. Of course, Hinduism also has a god of knowledge in Lord Ganesh, which he's mostly known as the overcomer of obstacles, but he is a god of wisdom and knowledge and a scribe as well. So if you are called to work with masculine, feminine aspects of knowledge, perhaps you would like to work with goddess Brahmacharini and Lord Ganesh together in your pursuit of that. And it's also said that Brahmacharini, because of her dedication, because of her attainment of knowledge through the thousands of years of working through the veil, governs Lord Mongol. And Lord Mongol can be, in this instance, a provider of fortune. Lord Mongol is the Hindu representation of the planet Mars, which is mostly identified with war, of course, and that red war energy. So if you are battling through a personal war, whether that is a dark night of the soul, whether you believe that is a dualistic form of the war between light and dark, whether that is any war of karma or, personal demons that you believe that you are experiencing in your life, working in dedication with Brahmacharini and her governance over Lord Mongol may help you in that journey. And lastly, I want to explain how Brahmacharini is connected with the chakra system, because yesterday, of course, we discussed how her previous incarnation is connected with the root chakra, and today she is connected as Brahmacharini with the sacral chakra, which is the chakra in Tantra that most governs pleasure. So it is a chakra system of pleasure, of sexual pleasure, of course, but also of creativity. And so that is that beautiful orange chakra that is right underneath your navel, between the solar plexus and the root. And so orange can be a sacred color to Brahmacharini. However, her sacred color, or the celebration color of the day, is actually green. So the way that she showed this to me is how doing her self-discovery work was the connection between that sacral chakra, or that sexual pleasure that she built up for a long time, right, in waiting for her beloved, or in working towards herself and her beloved, then can connect and spiral up with true love of the heart. And of course, the heart chakra is represented as that gorgeous green. She also wanted me to point out that she is sometimes known as Devi Yogini because it is believed that she was also practicing yoga during this time and during this period. And of course, Lord Shiva is very well known for his yoga, and together the god and goddess practice Tantra. And so Tantra, again, is that most connected, rather, with that sacral chakra, or that chakra of pleasure, which is why often Shiva and Shakti are presented and positioned in the lovemaking position when they are depicted together. So after this period, they had immense Kundalini awakening and togetherness within themselves, and then within their union together, which is also why I believe some of the lotus positioning, as you can see here around her neck, is mirroring of how the snake wraps himself around the neck of Lord Shiva. And of course, snake is a representation of Kundalini, and when it's seen at the neck or the head, it is a depiction of not being ruled over by maybe negative nagas or negative snake-like forces, but it's also a depiction of having rulership over one's own Kundalini and sexual force or sexual energy, and not having it rule you, because so many people, when that snake sits in the lower regions only, are ruled by their sexual drive and trying to feed that rather than allowing that sexual pleasure or that tantra to feed them and feed their spirit. So when it's depicted up there, that near the head, that's what it's representing. She also carries in one hand the Japa Mala, or the rosary, and in many, many cases, this rosary or Japa Mala is made of 𝇳𝋹��㶶. I know that I'm mispronouncing that, apologies, but that is the seed that is most sacred to Lord Shiva and is made into these malas, made into these necklaces, and these beads that are so often shown as being worn by Lord Shiva or by later incarnations of the goddess as Mahakali or different forms of Durga. Now here, she is not wearing the 𝇳𝋹��㶶, she is holding them because of their practice as a mala. So many people know in Buddhism how we use the mala, or in Christianity how we use the rosary, but in Hinduism it is used as well in the form of using each bead as a representation of certain prayers and as a practice of mindfulness meditation. And because she worked for all of these thousands of years through different forms of meditation to escalate her way through the veil, that is why she holds the mala and holds these beads, which are also said to be a representation of Lord Shiva's tears, rather than wears them. And I found it really significant that these seeds are said to be the manifested form of the tears that Lord Shiva shed in losing Sati, and also tears that Lord Shiva has shed for the world and for humanity who experiences dark times or periods of ignorance, which of course he comes to help us work through, both as a defender destroyer and as someone who sits in that deep meditation and helps inspire others through knowledge rather than ignorance. And of course, Brahmacharini is worshipped for emancipation from ignorance, for the endowment of moksha and peace and prosperity and tantra and love and reunification. So I hope that all of that speaks to you, beautiful soul. I know we had a really deep dive here. I didn't realize we were going to go that deep into it, but I'm so glad that Goddess showed up for us in this way. Again, as I said, if you are interested in exploring the other forms of Goddess, you can do so by exploring the playlist where I'm presenting the other aspects or the other 9 forms of Navadurga celebrated through Navratri. I also have energy art enlightened merch collections items on my website, Damcl Designs, damcldesigns.com, honoring Durga and one of her other forms as Kushmanda. So those things will be linked in the description. And if you are called to explore your moksha and your knowledge and your wisdom more with me, you can also find on my website my spiritual sessions and offerings in the form of quantum reading sessions and Akashic Records readings and so much more, including other energy art and enlightened merch items. I would love to work with you. If you are someone who is interested in exploring quantum and 𝑓 energy healing with me or life and consciousness coaching, there is also a link for a contact form to contact me about setting up a consultation to see if we are a good fit to go into deep healing and ascension works. I would love to work with more of you in that capacity. And linked in the video description, you will also find a donate link if you are called and drawn and able to support my free and public works and channels such as this. All donation amounts are really greatly appreciated to keep my channels going, but they are not necessary. I am so grateful and happy that you are here exploring the Goddess. If you made it this far, I really appreciate you. If this resonated with you and helped you get to know the Goddess more, be sure to remember to leave a like, and I would also be honored if you subscribed if you are in resonance with me and my other works. You will also find a chat and channel playlist going into other forms of channeling and spirituality other than Goddess, and I would love to have you there as well. And with that, I am going to close this out and wish you many blessings on your journey and in your celebrations of yourself and Goddess. Be blessed with love, light, and light codes. Love, Danielle. #Damcl at @𝑇̳𓋹𓓓𝓴 of damcldesigns.com. Bye for now.